Welcome to Midlife Matters. I'm Marie, and each week I'm joined by my friends Julie and Mindy to talk about all the topics keeping women in the middle years up at night. This week we're talking about raising average kids. It seems like average has become a bad word when it comes to children and parents. We'll talk about that, and we'll share some stories about our own amazing average sons and daughters. Let's get started. Hey guys, welcome back. It's so good to see you.
Hey,
Good to
great
see
to see
you.
you guys.
So today we have an interesting topic, and it's one that I brought up last week, and I said, what if we talked about this? And then we were all kind of horrified, like, could we actually say these things out loud?
True.
So we want to talk about average kids, and is it okay to raise an average child? And the way that this came about was I had a friend that said, would you do a show on the unmotivated child? I just want to know if my unmotivated child is going to turn out okay in life. I know you can't guarantee that, but maybe give some examples of other middle and high school kids that did just okay, and they still turned out fine. And I think that in today's society, we really need that. We really need this discussion because on Facebook, you're not going to see the post of, the child that got all B's on their report card. You're not going to see the post about the child that played 2 minutes in the soccer game and did not make a goal, just got benched again. You're not going to see a post of the girl that did not get asked to the prom. I mean, there's just a lot of averageness in society, but we don't talk about it. And with 12 kids between us, we've surely raised some average kids.
Or are still raising.
For sure. And one of our hesitations about doing this podcast was we didn't know how our own kids would feel about being called average. And so I asked my son, who is a senior at UT Knoxville, and I said, we're going to do a podcast on average kids. What do you think about that? He goes, well, you've raised 5 of them, so you should have a lot to say.
Way to go, Davis. Nice.
That was kind of the reaction my kids had too. They accepted it. They said, I've come to grips with my averageness, Mom. They didn't have a negative reaction like I thought they would.
Yeah. How about your kids, Mindy?
Mine did.
What did they say?
Surprise, I feel like I'm an average parent, first of all. So, an average parent should probably raise average children. But no, I asked my son and his friend while she was here, I said, how would you feel if I described you as being average? They said, oh, that would be awful. And I was like, oh, really? How come? They said, it just seems so negative. It's almost like you really could have done something better. Like my son plays football. He said, so if I'm an average football player, that means I'm not starting and I want to start. Right. Or if you're considered average at school, then you probably need to be doing something more to make it better. My 7th grade son, I could hardly get any words out of him, but the words that I did get out of Jacob was, I wouldn't like it if I called him average. But I do have something interesting to share before we get started, because the word average just has a very negative connotation. I got on Pinterest and I just typed in average. First of all, the things that pop up that people have looked up is pretty funny. The biggest thing that people have looked up on Pinterest, starting with the word average, is average size woman.
Oh, really?
Okay. But once you get past the list, you will find things on Pinterest when you look up average that say things like this: 16 confidence building activities, 8 things that can change your life in 1 year, 10 tricks to be more productive. And the best one of all is how to stop being average from now on. And it is a list of 9 activities. And I thought, how funny. Even Pinterest is giving you help so that you're not average.
When I looked up average, average is an objective mathematical concept. It means the norm. It means kind of doesn't stand out. If you think about a bell curve, the big hump in the middle, that's where most people fit in. And as it tapers off towards the left and the right, that's a very, very small percentage of people in those areas. Those would kind of be the outliers. So I think just mathematically, most of us fit in the middle. I don't know. I think it can be a negative term that a lot of people might think is mediocre. And I think that is a negative term. Like if my child is doing mediocre work, I think that means he's given it, not his best. He's only doing a halfway job.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that average has to mean anything like that.
Mm-hmm. It just means that you're falling within the range that most people fall.
Normal. Yes.
Right.
Normal.
Right.
Yeah.
So if I asked you, you have this new baby, and I said to you, do you think it's okay to just raise this new baby to just be an average, regular child? What does your mother's heart immediately do?
No. Because there's nothing average about a mother's love.
Right.
There's nothing average about that. It is exploding and exciting and overwhelming, and it cuts you to your core. It'll keep you up at night. And so all of that you put into that new baby, you continue to put in the rest of their years. And I have not seen it stop yet with my oldest even being gone. I'm assuming with you guys, you've got some married children. You still you have this amazing amount of love. And so I don't think a mother will ever see her child as necessarily, since average is not a bad word, but a mother's not going to say my child's average, because nothing about your love for them is average.
Right.
Yeah. I was thinking, I think we would all say yes to other moms. It's okay to raise an average child. But then with our own typical kids, we start thinking, are they okay? Should I push them? Why aren't they doing better? Did I mess them up? Is this normal? We don't for 1 minute just sit back and say, I'm fine with just raising an average kid.
No, and right from the beginning, when you go to the pediatrician, they start with the percentiles. Okay, my kid's head is bigger than 95% of the,
That's right.
or how long they are, how much they weigh, and everything's a comparison right from the beginning. Right. And if a mom says, "Is your kid crawling yet?" and if yours isn't, you feel this twinge of, "Why not? What about is something wrong?" So I feel like it's probably a better. As they get older, the more sensitive question is, hey, what's going on with your kid? Like where the answer can be more open-ended, not is your kid doing this? Is your kid doing this? Because it just feels like there's this constant comparison. And as they get older, you might not want to talk about everything that they're doing or not doing,
Right.
It's like you did when they were babies.
I know that I was probably a lot more tight-lipped. And I would secretly wonder things about my own children, but I was afraid to voice those, thinking that, they're not up to speed, or, they're not doing things like they should or like everybody else. And it's so funny, but I think the reason that Marie and I became such good friends was because when we met, my oldest son was in elementary school and her son, Davis, was several years older than Grant. And I remember talking about how Grant lost his lunchbox all the time, or how, there was something about school that I was really frustrated. And I was like, I just feel like, is there something wrong? And Marie was like, oh, all boys do that. And, Davis went through that stage, and my friend and her son and this. And I just remember feeling so relieved that I wasn't holding on to this anxiousness anymore, but to have a friend say, that's totally normal, because you kind of hit a point in motherhood where you're like, I don't even care about excelling anymore. I really just want to survive some of these stages. I just need to know that we're normal. And if I can just reach that normal status, I'm going to sleep just fine tonight.
Everybody needs a mom who's a little bit ahead of you. In their lives, so that you know what's coming up next and when it's going to end, and that it will end.
Yes, that's definitely true. Well, I wanted to see if, when we're talking about average kids, I don't think that we can ignore the importance of birth order and how that plays into whether we think our kids are average or not, and how easy it is for them to meet our expectations.
Right.
I really think that the second or third child makes out the best in terms of being allowed to reach their potential without parents interfering and, frankly, over-parenting.
Right.
I mean, everything your first child does is a miracle. You think they really, truly must be the most intelligent, funny, special person to have ever been created. I mean, that's just a fact.
It is.
At least until they start school. And then it seems like you spend the rest of the time trying to reconcile your elevated view of this child with reality. And it's really hard for reality to compete. Not that they aren't still so special in your eyes, but you realize that, hey, there's a ton of other special kids out there too. So many that, hey, I think they might all just be average.
Right. It's true.
Right. If you have a room full of geniuses, somebody's still going to be in the middle. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like it's somebody's got to be average no matter what group you're in. And
That's right.
yeah, I do think as babies, we all think like every little milestone reached is a sign of giftedness, or, hey, maybe we have a genius on our hands or a child prodigy. You know, I think every parent feels that way.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I remember thinking, oh, I'm going to teach Abby to read before she goes to school. I want her to be ahead. And so I did, and she was. And then I remember talking to a friend later as, you know, I had other children and they started growing. And she said, yes, there's all those moms that, you know, you can do all of these things with them at home, and you can really work on these activities and reaching milestones. And she said, really, they all kind of balance out by second grade. She said, the moms that don't do anything, the moms that overdo, she said, they're all in the same place by second grade. I was like, oh.
Well, and did you even bother trying to teach your second board to read early?
No,
I know.
Not one bit. I was like, why would I go through that again? That was awful.
Well, and they're just picking up on things. They're probably learning faster, just naturally picking up on things. Yeah.
Right.
Well, I started noticing like there were things that they were learning that I couldn't be ahead of everything. Like the more kids you have, you can't possibly do everything for every child. And I remember the lowest point, I thought it was kind of funny. And then later I felt like a hill. But like with Nathaniel, he's our last born. When he was in fourth grade, I remember explaining to the teacher, I said, I'm sorry, Nathaniel forgot to do his homework. I really don't even think about his homework when he comes home because he's the last of 4 children. And I was like, oh, that is so awful. Like here I used to be like pushing my other children. With Nathaniel, I'm not even asking him about homework in 4th grade. I'm like, look, you're either going to get it or you're not. And you really need to be in charge of your own homework.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about, is it ever good to be average?
And I think I said earlier, like if everybody was exceptional or everybody was a genius, somebody would still have to be in the middle. And my husband used to tell a story when he got into medical school. He had gone to college, to undergraduate, with a lot of kids that were just gunners, like they just had to be the top of the class. They had been the top of the class since kindergarten. Well, when they get to medical school, because medical school is accepting kind of the cream of the crop,
right?
They suddenly might find themselves middle or bottom of the class. And a lot of them just couldn't handle it because that was the first time in their life to ever experience that. So I feel like it kind of depends on who you're comparing yourself to. Like if you're average in a med school class, then that's not bad, because everybody can't be on the top. And another thing that this verse just came to mind, I couldn't remember where it was. I had to look it up, but it was Proverbs 30, verse 8. And it's where Solomon has 2 requests of God. He says, give me neither poverty or riches. Otherwise, I may have too much and forget you, Lord. Or I may become poor and steal and dishonor the name of my God. And I thought that was a pretty wise thing to recognize, that maybe the extremes are where the trouble lies. The extremes in anything, like you think about like the Mozart types. Well, they're not great socially, or they're awkward. And, like they all have, you can be great in things and then you're going to have deficits in other areas.
How do you feel when your child is average or maybe even below average in an area of life? And this doesn't have to always be academics. I was thinking about all the ways that a kid can be average. They can be average socially. Maybe they don't have the most friends. Maybe they're average physically. They're not real big. They're not real small. They're kind of right in the middle. Maybe they're average at sports. They could be average with the number of extracurricular activities that they're interested in being in. Maybe they're average musically, and you have really placed this great value on wanting your child to be musical, and maybe they're just ho-hum at it. You signed them up for band, and they're not first, second, or third chair. They're kind of like sixth or seventh, and they're not a standout star. So how do you feel when that happens? Because that happens to all parents.
I think it's easy to feel like it's a reflection on me somehow. I know it's not deep down, but I do have to fight that tendency and to speak truth. I have to almost talk to myself. Mm-hmm. Like, this is not a reflection on you. They are their own people. They have their own desires, their own dreams, their own plans. And like you said before, I can push and push, but they're going to settle on what makes them happy, what they want to do.
Well, I think it depends on the parent too, because no two people are the same. And when you get married to your spouse, you don't really know what type of parent you're going to be until you have those children. And then your marriage really shifts as you both become parents. And then as your kids get older, you really find out what those trigger points are for each of you. There's certain things that are important to my husband that are not so important to me. And there's certain things that are important to me that are not so important to my husband. Thank the Lord, because we balance each other well. So as our kids have gotten older, I have definitely seen Bryce's trigger points are grades. Those are not my trigger points. My trigger points have always been character issues. Mm-hmm. And so those are the things that keep me up at night. So I can only speak from myself here, but if I see my child and they're happily functioning, I see them doing their homework. I see that they are handling things well. If they're playing on a sports team, that they're doing their best and they're happy, I am completely fine. Mm-hmm. My husband, though, when he sees their grades come home and he's like, okay, so you got a B in this or you got a C in this. And I noticed that you're not necessarily using your time wisely after school. I'm noticing that maybe you're playing a lot, which is great, but you're not spending as much time on that work as you need to because you really can get an A. Like, I know that you know math well. So what is it that's keeping you from getting an A? I wouldn't necessarily ever ask that question. Mm-hmm. But Bryce would, and it's really healthy for us because then I think, oh yeah, he's right. They could totally get an A. And it's just shifting a little bit more responsibility on the child to kind of push a little bit. Mm-hmm. It kind of depends on what are your trigger points.
Right. I feel like as my kids have gotten older, I've gotten more and more okay with average. Are they reaching their potential? Do I feel like they're doing their best? The things that I obsessed about with my older child, even like friends, and was she asked to this certain thing, or is she doing well enough, in her lessons, or why isn't she playing more on the sports teams? I just realized that, it all evened out, and a lot of that stuff was way more important to me than it was ever important to her.
Right.
Yeah, I found the things that I stressed over weren't even important to them. And I think as your kids get older, you realize that. Like I've always been concerned about the number of friends they had, more of the boys than my daughter. And I'll still, even my 20-year-old, I'll still suggest, why don't you call this group or go,
Right.
And he's like, Mom, I'm fine, right. Or he'll call one person and I'll say, oh, why don't you call the whole college group? And he goes, because I don't like doing things in groups. I want to do things one-on-one, so and I've just had to let that go. Like, he's not me, right. And I think when they're little, you think they're just going to be little mini me's and they're not, and that's hard to let go of. And but once he told me that, I understand that. But
like, I feel the same way. Like, I have certain of my children that are naturally more like me. And you talked about their friends. Friends has always been a big deal to me too. But I have a couple of my children that really operate very well with just a few close friends. It always takes them longer to make those friends when we move, but then they have two maybe really good friends. And I used to worry about it, but not anymore.
Right.
This is kind of embarrassing, but I remember socially, and as homeschoolers, I'm thinking people are probably thinking, oh, of course your kids were awkward socially. No, it had nothing to do with that. They had lots of friends, lots of people to hang out with, but the area that I'm thinking about is dating. Like, John and I preferred that our kids not date in high school. We just thought there was a lot of drama there that wasn't necessary, and just preferred that that they didn't date. Well, my daughter really never got asked out on a date in high school. And I found myself thinking, oh, what's wrong with my daughter? Like, why is nobody asking my daughter out? Like, she's got a lot of great qualities. What's wrong? So I thought it was weird that here I am thinking I don't want her to date. But I guess it's like you wish she had the opportunity to say no. And so when I asked Molly about that, she goes, yeah, I would have liked to at least said no.
Right.
But as soon as she got to college, a year or two in, she ended up meeting her husband, and they're happily married now. And, I'm glad that she didn't go through lots of breakups and,
yeah,
it was the right thing. But she said, I knew there was nobody that I really cared about in high school dating. So she said, deep down, I was okay. It was a little awkward, when people ask and people noticed. But deep down, I knew there was nobody that I was really interested in enough to go out with.
Right.
So,
yeah.
Just have to have a lot of confidence.
Oh, I like that story. Okay, so we have to talk about this because I mentioned earlier, I do feel like I'm an average parent.
Oh.
And what that means to me is that I used to have this lofty idea of what I would be when my kids were in school. I was going to always help the teacher, be in the classroom, be that mom that was doing the doors and bringing in snacks for the teacher, and be the room mom. And then as I had more children, I would meet other moms that they were definitely that like go get 'em, that high achiever person. And I realized where my place was after that. I'm a good helper to the high achiever mom. So I learned quickly that I was not going to be the room mom anymore because I'm average. I don't care about having perfect cupcakes that match the theme of whatever you're teaching them in class. I would have been fine with Dunkin' Donuts. So.
Yes. Not only can your kids be average, but we can be average. I think before we have our first child, we truly believe we will be the most exceptional mom to have ever given birth. I think it's probably almost insulting to our own mothers how much better we think we will be.
It's true.
I don't think that our kids necessarily need to hear from us that they're average, maybe when they're young. Like we kind of had this discussion with my older two and we laughed about it. But I do feel like in a more subtle way, they need to have permission to be average, to not have to be exceptional at everything they do. And therefore, I think that's when we come in and say, well, then we have to be okay, maybe being average parents. If we're going to give them permission, then we have to give ourselves permission to be that too. The other day I was getting my hair cut, and the lady that cuts my hair, she's always asking me questions because her kids are younger. And I don't know if I give her any good advice or not, but she said her son, who I think is around 8 or 9, only talks about being in the NFL. Like he never will talk about his career plans because that's what he's going to do. And she's like, when do I tell him that he's not going to do that? How do I do that? And I just said, I think I would leave it to real life to let him figure that out. Like you don't have to be the bearer of that bad news. Pretty soon, he won't make the team or he won't be playing as much and he'll lose interest. I mean, he might not. He might go on to the NFL. But let real life experience tell him that.
That's
you don't
wise.
you don't have to tell him that right now. I think
I totally agree with you, Julie. I think that life experiences is one of the best teachers that we can utilize, and natural consequences to actions are a parent's dream gift because you don't want to tell your child because honestly, we don't know what our children are necessarily capable of. Maybe being in the NFL is not important to you. Maybe you're an academic. I get that. At the same time, I'm reading an article on Tom Brady on how one of his coaches said he should be a clipboard holder. He should have stuck with finance. Well, then here he is. He's a 5-time Super Bowl champion heading into his 9th Super Bowl. You don't know what is going to motivate your child necessarily. Watch them. Pray for them. If emotionally they're handling the pressure of whatever stage that they're in, whether academically or with a sport or with an activity, let them take the next step, one step at a time, see where it leads.
going along with what the other moms had written in, they really kind of wanted to know when you should push a kid, when you shouldn't. Do we have any thoughts on that about when you should push a kid?
Well, I have a child. It's my middle child, and he knows I'm going to talk about this, that did not have a lot of motivation in high school. And I worried about him constantly. I homeschooled, so I even felt more pressure that somehow I was connected to this.
Mm-hmm.
I was always questioning, what am I doing wrong? What should I be doing? What could I be doing? How hard should I push? And is he ever going to make it in life, if he's not motivated? And some days I would back off and say, you know what? I'm just going to let him fail.
Mm-hmm.
If he fails, he fails. And then the next day I'd be back to checking up on his homework, asking what assignments were due. How'd you do on that test? And I just kind of went back and forth. And I was part of a great group of supportive homeschool moms. And, while their kids had struggles, none of them were really struggling with that. Their kids were highly motivated. And so they never got into their kids' backpacks and checked their schedules and checked their test grades. And I just always felt like such a failure in that area. And I will say that I ended up leaning towards continuing to push and check and verify. It was totally exhausting. I was his external motivator all through high school. But I'll say that I was glad that I did it for him because I was trying to set him up for success at some point. I was trying to keep college an open door for him if someday he wanted that. He made good grades. It's just I had to push him to it. I was the motivator. I was the one requiring it, and he would do it. It's just that it took that external motivation. And I feel like if I had just let him fail, I'm not sure how he would have recovered from that at that time. It would have been maybe too big of a hole to dig himself out of, on his own. So I feel like looking back, I did the right thing on that. And I even talked to him and asked him, and he said, Mom, at the time, I felt like you were pushing too hard. Because I would say, he would come home with a B and I'd say, well, you really could have gotten an A, because I knew that he maybe didn't study as much, or he put in half the effort that he should have. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't that I just required all A's. I was always just trying to get him to live up to his capabilities. But now he would say, thank you, Mom, for pushing me. I needed that. And he finally did reach a point in college where he had a professor that he absolutely loved, that he was totally engaged with, and he wanted to please. And that just sparked something in his mind, and he owned it from then on. Mm-hmm. But I just feel like I kind of was holding him till he got to that place.
You said this to me before, that you wanted to hold open opportunities for him. Mm-hmm. And you just felt like a door would have closed that he wasn't really mature enough to have known whether he was okay with that or not.
Yeah, in ninth grade, if your kid says, I don't care about college, I don't think they really know that yet.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like, as the parent, you really need to be the one to say, well, you're going to care about this later. I don't want you to live with regret. I do think, too, that the way you pushed him was probably in an okay way, because he thanks you for it now. I think sometimes we can push in a way that actually hurts our relationship with the child. So even though we recognize that we need to push, we need to make sure we're not pushing in a way that's actually driving them farther away from us. Maybe they'll even end up meeting the goal, but our relationship is damaged.
Yeah. When I did ask him about this, he said, well, there was one area that you pushed too hard that I don't think was appropriate. And I knew exactly what he was going to say. Like pushing them into things they didn't care about. Oh. He said, I think you should push me academically. That was appreciated. But like in Boy Scouts, I knew he hated it, but I thought this is good for him and he's going to do it. And here I was lining up the whole plan to get his badges. He could care less about that. And so that, looking back, I should have let that go, and let him find his own interests. He eventually did, but we were just trying to expose him to as much as possible, thinking he's got to find something he likes that'll motivate him. That was our
for sure
reason we did it. Probably shouldn't have made him stay in it as long as I did.
Well, we currently are kind of in the midst still of raising and helping our son Grant. He's a junior in high school, and he was the unmotivated child. Sometimes is still the unmotivated child. We have struggled with how hard do we push, because there were times with Grant that we would push so hard that it did hurt the relationship. And then we would back off and we were like, well, what is the purpose? If our son gets all A's and, we completely lose him, completely have no relationship with him, what is the point? And so we've had to come to a place where we still are frustrated. We're frustrated that he doesn't turn things in on time. I can get online right now and I would see so many missing assignments. He's in 3 AP classes, which we did not push him into. He chose. I know, though, I can tell you right now, by the end of the year, he'll pass them all just fine. Like, he'll pass them more if I just leave him alone. And I don't really know why. I don't know how or why he chooses to do things necessarily the hard way, but he chooses to go down into a hole, have to climb up a mountain to make all the work back up, and he'll go back down into a hole and he'll have to climb the mountain again to try to make all the work back up. But sometimes, that's just the way he is. And last year we went through the same thing as a sophomore. We worked with his teachers. We stayed after school. We told the teachers, you need to allow him to fail. Bryce and I have agreed to let him fail. If he learns how to fail at home and recover, he'll learn more how to go into the world and how to recover if he fails. But we cannot force him to do it, just like you can't potty train your child. You cannot force them to do it. We cannot force him to do well in class, no matter what we did. And we were fighting all the time in it. We were like, it's just not worth it. So I check in every now and then, but I don't remind Grant to do anything anymore. He's a junior, and I'm at the point where natural consequences are going to set in, and we've reminded him of those natural consequences. Like, well, you love to play football. You've got a starting position on the team next year. If you don't have the grades, you're not going to be able to play. It's just plain and simple. We've started to do college visits and talking about what you want to do after school. And we're like, yeah, well, Abby had to pay for school. How are you going to pay for school? Because right now your grades aren't going to get a scholarship. So, so how are you going to pay for that? He may not be able to go to the college that he wants to. I think he'll still go. But we're still in the midst of this. We still have, over a year left. And I don't know. I don't have the answers. I just know that right now we want to have a peaceful existence and even a joyful existence with our son. But at the same time, he is not motivated the way we are.
I think you're doing the right thing in leaning on life experiences to teach him those lessons. Not being on football or not getting into the college that you want is a neutral thing that will teach him something. It's not a personal thing.
Sounds like he kind of knows how to get himself out of it. He can recover from it.
It's so frustrating. He knows how to survive. Yeah.
And it's not a terrible thing if he doesn't go to the college of his dreams right away.
Right.
You still have time to do that. Our son ended up going to community college the first few years. And I hate to say that because my third child is there now, but it's not for the same reasons. But we just didn't feel like it was a good use of our money to go to a fancy private school, not knowing how he was going to perform because he didn't have the track record yet.
Right.
Once he spent 2 years there, he proved himself, then he moved on, and he graduated and he did great. So
I will say, the question was, when should you push your child? So I've talked about Grant, but I'll also say that I have a child that struggles with anxiety and fear. With him, I can see him not doing activities because he's afraid. And that those are activities that I do push him towards. And then he really is always happy that he's done it. And so that is absolutely a time that I say, you have to help your child see something. If it's something they secretly want, they're just too afraid to step out and try. Somehow to help them get there is very, very healthy.
Right. I was thinking about when it's okay to push a child. I use my oldest as an example. there are plenty of times when I shouldn't have pushed. But just for all the people out there who may have dealt with this, my oldest went to college and she would call me every January in tears, sobbing, "Can I please quit, Mom? I hate school. I don't want to be here. Why are you making me go? I don't need this. I don't even want a college degree. I want to be in photography. I don't need a college degree." And every January, like clockwork, we would have this discussion, and I would feel about 2 inches tall pushing her to stay. But I just felt like she may look back with regret that she didn't at least get her 4-year degree. She's already there. I mean, when she's still calling me as a junior, you're thinking, my goodness, you're 2.5 years in, Abigail. You're almost to the finish line. All the time we were saying, come on, you can do it. You're almost there. You can do it. It would have been easier for me to just say, oh, you hate it so much, just come home. Even on graduation day last May, I felt kind of bad because she said, oh, I'm glad I graduated, but I told myself it's the last thing I ever have to do to please my mom. Oh. And even then I sort of felt like, oh, did she only do it all for me? I had hoped that by now she would have done it for a little bit for herself. But I think now that she's been out of school almost a year, she is glad that she has the 4-year degree. But I was so glad when January came around this time. I did not get a call this month because she's not in school. And I said, Abigail, how does it feel to not be in school? And she's just over the moon about it because even though she was perfectly capable of doing the work, she didn't want it. She didn't want that. So I don't know. I still feel like it was the right thing to have pushed her. But in the midst of it, it always felt very lonely and it was a hard thing to do.
That is hard.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk a little bit about ourselves. How did your parents raise you, and did you feel like you met their expectations? And did that affect you or influence what you did?
Being an only child, I felt like I had a lot of attention. Mm-hmm. You know, I felt the laser focus there. They did expect good grades for me, and I talked to my mom about this, and she said, "Oh, I was probably too hard on you. I really expected, high grades and all." But I told her I didn't remember it that way because I felt like I had a lot of that internal motivation that I wouldn't have even noticed her expectations because I felt like mine might have even been higher, But they were all very supportive of everything I did. And I did a lot and they showed up for it all. But, I was the only one. They didn't have to divide their time between other kids. And I think that just gave me a lot of confidence to try new things. I wanted to be good at the things I did. And so I practiced and I studied and I didn't feel like I had to be the best at it to enjoy it. Like I was never tempted to quit something because I wasn't the best. So I kind of felt like being average was okay because it was fun. I just wanted to do things that were fun. So even though I did have a whole lot of internal motivation, I did tend to be a people pleaser. So I probably did stick with some things longer than I wanted to please my parents. Like piano. Piano was one of those things. I took lessons for 12 years. And because I knew it was really important to my mom. But I am so glad I did now. I mean, I didn't always enjoy it. I didn't always practice, but I'm so glad I have that skill that, just for me to enjoy.
Yeah. So. Mindy, how about you?
Well, being raised, I mentioned in our first episode, all the places that I'm from. I was being raised in a military family where we were moving every couple of years. And so my parents were very similar to Julie's in that they were very supportive of everything that I did. And I quickly learned that when you moved, you could reinvent yourself. You could try something new. And I wanted to do it all. Similar to Julie, I played all different kinds of sports. I was in a lot of different clubs. I did go to 4 different high schools. But I was a naturally shy child. And because of all of the moving, I grew out of that and became very confident, creative. I didn't get in trouble for grades ever. And it always seemed that I would have 1 C on my report card. And they were always fine with that. Like grades were not one of those things that we were going to fight over. I do remember one time they tried to bribe us with a gift or money if we got all A's. And I just didn't really care about it enough to work harder. So I was like, well, I'm fine without that. So I don't really need to do that. I did some college before I was married, and then was married young. And then after we had Abby Ray, I actually went back and took classes in college. That was the one time in my life I got all A's, and it was very easy because I was so excited to learn and so excited to be out of, kind of at home with a newborn that I loved it. And I absolutely loved the growth and the learning. And so I'm not sure what changed between, my earlier years and that, but the motivation was there, and getting an A was then easy because I wanted it. I wanted to be there.
It's hard to really reflect on your own childhood. I do have a vivid memory of bringing my report card home in 3rd grade. I don't know if I had a grade. I guess I must have had a grade next to spelling. I don't remember the old time report cards. They would have like a lot of S's and
right.
What was the thing if you were
U's.
surpassing expectations?
E, excellent.
Okay, yes. So you wanted a lot of E's.
Right.
You might get a lot of satisfactory.
Yeah.
And you definitely didn't want any U's. But anyways,
the average.
Yeah.
Yes.
I remember my dad being, and not upset in like a fly off the handle type way, but I could tell that he was upset in a disappointed way that I had not done well in spelling. And I knew in my heart that I had not tried in spelling. And I remember that he basically said, I don't want to see that grade again. And so I was not going to get in trouble that particular time, but I better not bring that home again like that. And I think that just kind of started a pattern in my life that I knew that grades were then important to my parents. So even though my parents, I knew they had expectations of good grades, it wasn't really a problem for me to meet those expectations. I didn't feel bad like I couldn't live up to those expectations. I do think, parental expectations, it would just probably be better if we were just honest with our kids and told them how we really feel and what we really expect, so that we don't even just are still in adulthood wondering, did I meet my parents' expectations? Because sometimes there are still areas of my life where I think, why am I doing this? Well, because I think it's important to my parents when it's not even really important. Why am I still doing this at this age? Because I think it's important to my parents if it's not important to me. Is that like a lifelong thing?
Well, and maybe it's your, that plays into birth order and your personality. Because I know a lot of people that don't care what their parents think, but I still do. That factors into a lot of my decisions.
Right. Yeah. How about you being the baby, Mindy? Do you even think about what your parents expect anymore?
I do, because in a different way, but I want them to be proud of me. I want them to know that, I'm doing well. I want to feel like they're proud of me with how I love my husband, or I want them to feel that they're proud of me for the home that I keep or the children that I'm raising. And so when they come to our house, I used to put a lot of pressure on myself on the presentation and the food. And I just really wanted to blow their minds with what a great cook and housekeeper and decorator and mother. And wow, Mindy, I'm so proud of you. But my mom had tried to tell me years ago, it wasn't about those things. And they would tell me now, like they just wanted to see me. They just wanted to see Bryce and the kids. And they didn't really care about all that other stuff. But I don't know why I put that on myself. But I did, and we'll see if I still do as I get older. But
right. Yeah, I really hope for my adult children that they don't have that kind of a burden, but I don't know if you can ever get away from it, because if you love your parents, you want to please them, you want to meet their expectations. And a lot of times kids think their parents have an expectation that they really don't.
It's true.
And we don't know where that necessarily comes from, but it still nags at the back of our mind.
Like I had a small snippet of this with Abby Ray. I told you guys I was able to go stay in her dorm room. Well, she lovingly gave me her bed and borrowed a mattress from a friend and slept on the floor. She made several comments about how she had wished she had picked this up, or how, I'm sorry that this isn't put together. And I was like, well, I was thinking you left home just like 4 months ago and your room was never clean and you never cared. But it's funny now, going to your dorm room that she cared so much because it was her space and me for the first time coming in. The difference in the ownership that she had was amazing. I was like, Abby, I don't care about any of this. I want to see you. I want to see how you're living and thriving. I want to meet your friends. I want to go see your church. And every time she said that, I was like, I wish I could take that burden off of you because I don't care about that at all. And I finally was like, oh, I get what my mother's been trying to tell me.
Right. That's true. Which kind of leads us to our last question, which is, what is your definition of success for your kids? What have you told them? What do they think would make you happy?
Well, I did tell my kids that I am very, very, very proud of who they are. And it's more about who they are, not what they do. Because I think the world's definition of success is more about a measurement of how much money you have, what degree you have,
right,
what kind of power and influence you have, and things like that. And I'm not saying that you can't have both. I'm not saying, oh, my kids have chosen character over,
right?
Because you can have both. You can.
Right.
But those are the things that I want to focus on because I'm proud of the choices they've made, the decisions they've made, the things that are priorities in their life, that no matter what else they were successful in the world, like if they didn't have that, that would make me sad.
Right. Yeah. I was thinking that, as a Christian parent, my number one desire for my kids has always been that they have a personal relationship with the Lord, that they're following God's path for their life. And after that, I would like to see them have strong family relationships. I'd like to see them get married and have children and have the joy that raising a family is. And I'd like to see them do productive work, either inside or outside of the home, something that makes them happy. But I've never wished a certain profession on them. I've never wished, fame or fortune or riches. I've tried to instill in them that that's just not important to me.
I really could just echo all that you both just said. That is exactly how I feel. That is how I would deem my children successful. Following after the Lord, making goals and achieving the goals that are important to them. If I see that they have joy in their life, we all are going to have struggles, but how they handle those struggles, all of those areas are they mean the world to us to see our kids thriving in each of those areas.
Right.
To be a successful parent, I now consider, did I do the best that I could do with the best that I had? Was I a good steward of what I had with the knowledge that I had at the time? Because I think it's easy to look back as a parent and regret things like, oh, I wish I could have faced that challenge or that decision as the person I am now. But we can't do that. It's
right.
When you have kids, you realize that they change you. They bring out all your worst flaws and weaknesses, and you grow and change because of them. I tell my kids all the time, I'm sorry for all the mistakes I made on you, but I was doing the best I could do with what I had and what I knew at the time.
Right.
The me that I was. And I also think that as a Christian, success has to start with, our personal relationship with Jesus Christ and letting God have authority in our life and giving up our rights to our own ways, letting him have a hand in our life and allowing him to transform our lives. I don't think we can have true success without that.
Well, the nice thing about kids is they are so forgiving of our mistakes. And a lot of times they don't remember them.
I did pray that. Forget my mistakes. Lord, please don't let them remember those things.
Yes.
I think they recognize that the mistakes you make really, truly are out of love. They're not out of malice. They're because you were doing the best you knew how to do at the time with what you had.
If you didn't care about them, you wouldn't care so much.
All right. So after all this discussion, I think we've established that average is okay and it's not a bad word.
Average is awesome.
Maybe instead of putting average, we should say satisfactory. We're doing satisfactory jobs, and we are turning out satisfactory kids.
Do you remember what satisfactory meant?
No. Is it something
the
bad?
Requirements, meeting the minimums.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Oh, it did?
Something like that.
All right.
Okay, I still have my report cards from first grade because my mom kept them. Yeah. And I have lots of U's. And guess what subjects they were in? Or what area?
Math?
Conduct.
Oh, conduct?
In conduct. I got U's for excessive talking.
Oh, me too.
Oh, I always did too.
And I couldn't stay in my seat. Which is really funny because then I went to no talking.
You did?
Oh, yeah. I was painfully shy.
Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah. But early on, before I changed schools, I was out of control, apparently. And then when we changed schools, I was like, I don't know anybody. And I totally changed personality.
Well, that's probably why we all enjoy doing this podcast, because we like excessive talking.
I know. Yep. The tension for that.
Y'all are bringing it back.
All right. We'll see you guys next week.
Sounds great. Bye.
We're so happy you joined us today. If you'd like to get the show notes for today's episode, please email your name and address to midlifematterspodcast@gmail.com and write show notes in the subject line. Also, please tell a friend about the show and help them hit the free subscribe button on their favorite podcast app. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Midlife Matters Podcast. That's where we post pictures and stories about all the things we talk about in each episode. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.